here. Jason. Jason is on the run from the CIA hit squads as he tries to uncover truths about his father. When former CIA operative Nicky Carson
Lee, I think you might have been wrong. Jason. No, Jason Little.
We don't have Jason Bourne right now?
No, Jason Bourne.
Well, I'm excited that Jason Little is here.
The real Jason that's here today has a passion for the people side of change management. He loves to focus on the behaviors and relationships with building on trust. Let me just see. We've got. He's an author. He's written some pretty hot stuff. And if you haven't, there is a copy of his book, the Lean Change Management book, which you will autograph. He only charges $5 for autographs. If you have a code, he'll do it for free. And he also burned a cranberry silo for 40 years. At least that's what he tells me. I don't believe. I think it's more like 30 years. It's not that old. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Jason Little.
All night long. There's got to be Kelly Clarkson fans in the house. Who would admit it? Yes, one. Okay, cool. Well, now that my credibility has been completely destroyed, and I can't possibly live up to that introduction, but I can slip and kill myself on some papers. 1995 was a very different time. Who remembers what eBay was called before they were called eBay? Internet nerd trivia. Nothing? Auction Bay. Auction Bay. And what was the first thing that was sold on Auction Bay? Any wild guesses? Oh, no fair. Yeah, broken laser pointer was the first thing that was sold on Auction Bay in 1995. So I think we've progressed a little bit since then. But do you remember having one of these? Anybody? Yes, for a whopping $250, you could get a device that would not be able to store one high-quality album in MP3 format. I had a whole rainbow collection of these, actually. Did anybody get the rainbow collection kit where you got all the rainbow colors with your zip drive? Yes, good. We had the same kit. Awesome. So things were quite different back then. And today we've progressed a little bit. Who has kids? Who has kids that play video games? Who has kids that don't play video games anymore, but they watch other kids play video games on YouTube? Yeah, we have the Lego Dimensions kit for the PS3. And as we're installing it, anybody have a PS3? It doesn't matter what game you buy, you have to wait 4 hours for it to download the update the first time you play it. So while my 9-year-old's waiting for the update to download, she goes on the iPad and watches YouTube for how to walk through the game. So things are different today. Today you don't even have to stalk celebrities. You can stalk them online. You know, I went to a lot of concerts when I was a kid, so you'd kind of get there, you'd sleep on the sidewalk, you'd look for any tour bus just so you could get a chance to meet Sebastian Bach of Skid Row. And a couple of weeks ago, my daughter's in the basement, and she's stalking one of her YouTube celebrities in a game called Roblox. Anybody's kids play Roblox, a little virtual reality environment? So she's watching something on one screen and waiting for Chad the Gamer to show up in the other one. So Chad the Gamer shows up in this little virtual world, and all the little virtual characters of all these 7, 8, and 9-year-olds jumping up and down around this guy. So it's a lot safer to stalk people now than it used to be. And it's a little bit easier. But things are different. For the size of your pinky, you can get 10 times the amount of storage for the same price. You can hold your whole life on one little tiny piece of memory compared to the way things used to be. So we're progressing at an alarming rate as a society, but some of the things we do in our organizations are still kind of stuck in 20, 30, 40-year-old thinking. Anybody have one of these or know what one of these are? I grew up in a zero stoplight town. Anybody else grow up in a zero stoplight town where there's one store? Yeah. So when I was anxiously awaiting my Motley Crue cassettes to show up from Columbia House, so I think Columbia House used to do 8-track. Was anybody doing 8-track through Columbia House? 8-track? Really? Wow, cool. You're a young man, sir. Wow, awesome. So you'd peer down the end of the driveway and go, man, I hope my Motley Crue cassettes are here today. And you'd run down there and you'd just get the gas bill and the hydro bill and all this other kind of stuff. But you went to the mailbox once a day 20 years ago. It was every day. We knew exactly when the car would go by. It had the little orange siren on the side of it, and it would come by, and then you'd peek down and run out and grab your stuff. But it was once a day. Today, we're going to the mailbox thousands of times. I didn't bring my phone up with me. Oh. But if I had a phone in my hand, I would say, because of these stupid things, 1,000 times a day, we're getting bombarded with Facebook messages, Twitter, text messages. Sometimes it even rings, because they are voice devices too. But we're getting bombarded with stuff, and our brains are overstimulated with this. One of my favorite books is The Organized Mind by Barry Levitin. And he describes the problem when we were cave people. You only had to store 2 things in your brain. Any guesses what those 2 things were? Food. Yeah, things I can eat and things I can be eaten by. That's it. So nowadays, you go to the grocery store and there's 9,000 types of salad dressing, and whatever you pick is going to suck because you could have picked something better. So it's called the paradox of choice. Our brains are just constantly bombarded with stuff. It's almost like you go to work to go on cruise control. Anybody get to work in the morning and you're like, oh, thank God the weekend is over. No more ballet and hockey practice and trying to remember 10 frickin' passwords for all my kids' accounts and then trying to remember all the accounts they create, because when they can't remember their Roblox account, they create a new one and they don't tell you, and they use a different handle and they use your email address, and you got to clean all this clutter out of your brain, and you come to work and it's like, oh man, I just want to sit. I want to have my coffee in peace. And then you got some nagging agile coach or change person coming in saying how you have to be more agile, or how you have to change your organization. And here's the new templates for the TPS reports that you have to fill out. So it's just more crap that we have to deal with. And it can be exhausting. But what's the point? I think we know, right? You know, people who have kids, your kids know change constantly. So is it a big deal for anybody who has kids? If anything changes in their life, are they just like, whatever, who cares? Or does it stress them out? Stresses them out? Because it's constant. You're constantly bombarded with stuff. But the point is, like I mentioned, everything we know about change is kind of rooted in stuff that is 20 years old. Best practices, standards, documentation. So yesterday I spoke at a more traditional conference that kind of still values some of these ideas and told some of the similar stories. But the solution is usually, well, if we can't get things to work right, what do? Well, we need a better process for that. We need a standardized process for that. Who's working in a company that's, I'll say medium or larger? So let's just say 200-300 people or more. Anybody? Yeah, so we just have to get all those teams doing the exact same thing in a standardized way and everything will work. But it doesn't work that way. This is the kind of outdated thinking that gets us into trouble. So if we just follow the process, everything's going to work out right. And we still try to apply that same machine type of thinking to our organizations. But we've got to figure out a way that we can upgrade our approaches for change. How can we move away from some of these old ideas, and how can we modernize our practices, considering that things are different than they were 20 years ago? We know we're overtaxed with change in our personal lives, and we've got so much stuff that we need to think about, and so many things we need to do. Can we leverage how that change happens in society and apply that to how we bring in change in our organizations? One example is, who plays Candy Crush? Still. I know I know. So the makers of Candy Crush King, I met one of the people who works there, and he said the way that they spread change, it's team by team. So imagine if you are all at your tables, you're all different teams, and you guys want to experiment with something, and you try it out, and it works well for your team. Then you put that onto the network, And by network, it could be an internal Facebook site, it could be an internal Twitter site, it could be through email, it could be word of mouth, whatever it is. And then all you other teams hear about it, and you're like, hey, that might be a cool idea, maybe we should try that too. But for you guys, you think, well, that's stupid, that would never work for us because it doesn't match the kind of work that we do. You don't have to do it. It's not something that's mandated. It uses different type of thinking to spread change throughout the organization. And these are some of the types of things that we can start to leverage when we're trying to bring change in our organizations. So, when big consulting firms start to talk about uncertainty and how things are different and how we're losing predictability, then, number one, it could mean they're coming up with a certification to be able to fix the problem, because that's what big companies like to do. Or it could mean they start to recognize that, we've got to change how we do stuff. So this short-term shareholder thinking is something that has to change, because we have a lot less control over the future of our organizations than we used to. There's much more market influence. By the time I'm finished saying this sentence, 50 new companies would have started around the world. And just as many would have died. It's pretty easy for a 14-year-old kid in their basement to disrupt an established industry. It's just different today. So we're still left with the question, how do we get them to change? Has anybody said that? How do I get that team to do this? Or how do I get my developers to do that? Or how can I get management to do this? Has anybody said that? Or thought it? Who is in a dedicated change role today? You're either an Agile coach, you're a change person, or you've been kind of tapped on the shoulder to spray some Agile dust on your organization. Well, sometimes it might feel that way. It might feel that, hey, go Agile all the things. Because it's an uncertain thing, right? Agile is becoming a lot more popular. You can see it in LinkedIn. My feed is littered with how do we make the process of asking for the bathroom key from the manager more agile? How do we make marketing more agile? How do we make this group more agile? It's everywhere. Anybody else bombarded with this stuff everywhere? LinkedIn, different groups, yeah. And you see the arguments. You see the Kanban people yelling at the Agile people, and you see the Agile people yelling at the Scrum people, and everybody's, my Agile can beat up your Agile. It's just bombarded with stuff. But we're still trying to figure out how do we improve as an organization? And how can we move away from the typical, let's plan everything in advance, let's execute the change, and then let's close it down. So project thinking. How do we move away from that? We know a few things about change. Has anyone seen this before? In the quote-unquote traditional world, this is kind of preached as the truth. This is how people experience change. First, you are shocked. Then you go into denial. Then you get frustrated, and then you get depressed. Then you experiment, you try some things out, and you decide on your own that, yeah, you know what, I'm going to integrate this into my new self. Has anybody seen this before? This is the Kubler-Ross model. And a lot of I've kind of got one leg in the traditional change world and one leg in the Agile world. And in the traditional world, this is sort of a foundational idea about how people process change. And it usually gets people into a stance of, well, we know people are going to be shocked and they're going to be in denial. That means they're going to resist the change. Do you guys ever have people in your organizations who resist change? Yeah, of course, it's those people. It can't possibly be me. It can't be about my approach. It can't be about the change. It has to be those people because they're resisting change because they're shocked and denial. That just sets us up in kind of a negative approach for change. It just assumes that it's always a negative reaction to change. And we're going to do a little quick exercise in a second to show that. This is another model. Has anybody seen this before? So this is the Virginia Satir model. So it describes that the status quo is humming along and everything's great and everything's working well, and then some event happens. So it could be go make all the Agiles. It could be we're moving offices. It could be we're getting a new software package for our operations team. Some event happens that sends us into chaos. And when we're in chaos, we don't know what's going on, and we're losing something as part of our identity, and nobody knows what's happening, and we don't know what the purpose is, and we don't know what the value for this change is going to be when it's done. And then we hit the transforming idea, and we're like, yes, I get it. I know exactly what's going to happen. And then we try to practice. We build this into our new self, and then we arrive at the new status quo. So change kind of rides the roller coaster. There's sort of, The arc of change, where early on it's kind of chaotic, but sometimes it's a little bit fun, and then it's like, oh, I'm learning some new stuff and really cool, and oh my God, this is going to be really hard, and ooh, we can't change that, and oh my God, oh no, and you hit the bottom again. And then some other event happens, and it starts the wave of change all over again. So it kind of happens differently than a lot of these older models kind of say that it happens. And the author of this book says, you know, there is some truth in some of those models, but they were created in a different time. They were created in the 50s and 60s when things were more stable. There were no interwebs. Dad worked at the tire factory for 50 years. I'm going to channel my inner Donald Trump and say, Mom baked pies in the kitchen. We had 2 kids and a Buick station wagon and a white picket fence, and things were predictable. We didn't have to take the kids to 500 different types of activities after school and stuff, but much of the psychology and the emotional models that we know about change were built in a time when the world was more stable and we weren't constantly bombarded. So how do we upgrade how we think about change? So let's just do a quick exercise. You need everybody to stand up. I know many people here, so I know some of you have done this before, so don't give away the secret if you know. But I'm going to give you 4 instructions, and then I'm going to say go. Okay, so don't do it until we go through the 4 quick instructions. Okay? So first thing is you're going to pair up with somebody. So just pick somebody that you're going to pair up with to do this exercise. Okay, so everybody has somebody that they're paired up with. The next thing that you're going to do is stand back to back with that person. You can go ahead and stand back to back now, I guess. So you're going to stand back to back. Once you're back to back, when I say go, change 3 things about your appearance. And then when you're done, face each other and see if you can guess what's changed. So go. Change 3 things about your appearance. That was a wave file, it wasn't me, I swear. Okay, turn around and see if you can guess the 3 things. Okay, did everybody guess the 3 things? 2, got 2. Anybody get all 3? Got 2, got all 3, got all 3, got all 3. Okay, cool. All right. So what was your initial reaction to the instructions? Let's start with people who haven't done this before, because I know a few people have. Who's done it before? Just curious. Show your hands. Okay. So what was the initial reaction to the exercise? There's limited things you could change? Okay. Oh, I should have planned better. I should have looked at her more carefully. Yeah? Anything else? This is hard. Anything else? This is fun? From the man's perspective, how low can I go? Okay. We don't have to edit this out, do we? This is a family show. We're here to be. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. What should I change? To eliminate what could be changed. Okay. Did Ellen have her hand up? No? Okay, I thought I saw a hand go up. All right. Okay, so all over the place. Did anybody go into shock and denial and anger and frustration? It was hard, so maybe there was a bit of a, but not everybody processed this change the same way. So we're going to try and do round 2. So you're going to pair up with the same person, but you have to change 3 different things. All right, no, we're not going to do round 2, but thank you for proving the point. Bam! Okay, when I said we were going to do round 2, who did this? Who did this in their brains? Who did this? Anybody? Yes? Yeah, cool. Hey, yeah, it would be awesome. What about this? And this is okay, you can be honest. I won't be offended, I swear. Yeah. Sometimes we don't know, why is this idiot doing this? I wish he would go back to singing Kelly Clarkson again. That's possible. I could do that. So we're all over the place when it comes to processing change. And we as change people sort of have to navigate that mess of spaghetti and white space to, who thought it was cool? You guys thought it was cool, you were fine with it, Sue thought it was cool, and who was like, oh my God, no. Yeah, so we've got to figure out if you guys are on the same team, and you're like, oh God, no, I can't do this, and you're like, dude, what's wrong with him? He's resisting change, just like in Dumb and Dumber. He's resisting me. How are we going to figure out how to get you guys aligned? It's only going to happen through a conversation. It's not going to happen through beating someone over the head with the ADCAR stick. Well, he's more aware of the change than you are, and he has more desire than you do, and he has more knowledge and ability and reinforcement. It doesn't work. The only way it's going to work is if we have a conversation and kind of meet in the middle somewhere. From the communication coach. All right. So sometimes change is just hard. And it's just hard. We don't know why. Has anybody heard that 70% of all changes fail stat before? By show of hands? Yeah, there's this nasty stat going around that 70% of changes fail, and all the major consulting firms and all these other organizations have done multiple studies, and they say 70% of the time changes fail. But sometimes it's just hard. We can't who's been through a reorganization? They're just hard and complex. How do you say it worked? Well, the org chart looks different than it did yesterday, so the change worked, it was successful. Or should it have met the outcome? Well, how did you know it met the outcome? Well, because we built a business case in ROI that we reverse engineered when the project was done to make the outcome match the ROI. We can't use these binary, it worked or it didn't, measurements, because sometimes it's just hard. And we have to approach change a different way when that's the case. And sometimes, oh my God, no, it's just dumb, I don't get it. Anybody kind of talk to you in your organizations that are trying Agile, and they're just, this Agile thing's dumb, everything works fine. We deliver great, why do we have to get all the Agiles? Sometimes people just think it's dumb. And then sometimes, well, it's just if you're under stress and you have a deadline and you gotta get product out the door, sometimes it's just easier to do it the old way, because when you get home, you're gonna have to reset 11 passwords for your kids and try to figure out what account they signed up for and why they were able to get their thumbprint working on your device and spent $37 on a My Little Pony add-on. I swear it wasn't mine. I have my My Little Pony app locked down. But sometimes it's easier just to fall back on the old way. And when we approach change, we have to approach those 3 different problems in 3 different ways. So if it's too hard, we have to figure out how to make it easier as change people. How do we make it easier for people to adjust to this change by making it harder for us to facilitate that change? So if we're in a big company and the easiest way is to say, hey, when you want to get onboarded with our process, fill out this form on our SharePoint site. And we have a SharePoint consultant, Chris Chapman. You can email him at chris@leanintoit.com, and he would be happy to consult with you on a SharePoint solution. That one's for you, Chris. So we have to figure out how to make it easier, even though it's harder for us. How do we do a conversation instead of emailing a form out? Because it's easier if we get the form because we can do data analysis and we can report it on our status report. but it should be harder for us if the change is just hard for people to do. If it's just a dumb change, we have to figure out, well, what's going to get you over the sticking point? What's the sticking point of why you think it's dumb? Or why don't you get it? Or why do you think the old way was better than Agile? Or why do you think that the way we were organized previously is better than the way it's supposed to be when this new change comes up? How can we motivate people? We always default to that middle. We always assume people resist change and we have to motivate them. And then the last one is, how do we nudge people? How do we just remind people that something different is happening? We're going to jump into an exercise and try something out at your tables. But fundamentally, there's no solitary, linear, one model, one process that's going to help us work through all this type of stuff. And when I started out, I started talking about 1995. Now, not only was that one of Skid Row's best records they put out that didn't sell because grunge had taken over rock at the time, it was also important in the world of change. What happened in 1995 for any change management people? CDs? No, think of the change management world. What thing was invented in 1995? What white paper came out from a famous change person? Yes, John Cotter's 8 Steps for Change. Number 1, create urgency. Number 2, create a guiding coalition. That came out in 1995. And now, because I've got a leg in each camp, I see the Agile world seeing those 8 steps and going, oh my God, that's the greatest thing ever. And then I see people in the change world going, are people still using that? That's great if you're moving a printer. But if you're doing people change, it's not, there's some good points in it. You can get some value out of it, but we've kind of moved on from that stuff. That's just basic table stakes nowadays. And this was the conversation that happened yesterday at the traditional conference I was at too. People said, the ProSize and the Cotters, they're great for foundational stuff, but after a year, I got it. And you move on to coaching. And there was a lot of conversations about how change people are going to morph into coaches. To which I replied, well, there's a whole bunch of Agile coaches out there that are going to take your jobs. But don't worry. So let's try something out. When we came up with the idea for this conference, it was, we don't like 40-minute talks. A lot of the speakers that helped create this thing. We want to do shorter things and then get you guys to try the ideas out that we talked about. So you can practice it in a safe environment, and you get an exercise that you could do tomorrow when you go back to your organizations. So we're going to try this. What I want you guys to do is to form groups of 4 to 5 people. There's probably, you can use the cruiser tables if you want. There's an extra table up here. And come up with some type of problem. So odds are somebody's trying to get a change to work in their organization that they're stuck on. So you're going to have to just have a 5-minute conversation and talk about the type of problem that you want to work on for this exercise. So it could be you're a coach and you're trying to coach a small organization that wants to transform to Agile. It could be you're responsible for installing a new piece of software and a whole bunch of business operational processes are going to change and you can't get people into the training to learn this new tool. So I want to work on that problem. Whatever kind of problem that you're thinking about, just take 5 minutes, form your teams. It's good if you can do it in smaller groups of 4 or 5. If you wanted to stay at your own tables in bigger group, that's cool too. I don't have a preference. But I'll start the timer for 5 minutes. Everybody needs to come up with at least one problem that they want to use for this exercise. All right, so does every team have a problem? Put your hand up if you've decided on a problem that you want to work on. Everybody? Still deciding? Should I hum the Jeopardy, or should I replay the Jeopardy wave file again? It can bleed into the next block. You'll be okay. Okay, so now that you have a problem to work on, as a team, brain right Does anybody know what brain writing is, as opposed to brainstorming? Okay, so the people who raised your hands, what's the difference? Come on, tell us, what's the difference between brainstorming and brain writing? Yeah, brain writing, you just do it quietly. So you could call it silent brainstorming, but there's brain science from a dude, Steve Rogalski, who did an awesome session around brain writing ideas silently is going to get you the most ideas. There's a longer explanation to it. So there's sticky notes, and there should be pens and or Sharpies at the tables with whatever problem that you're going to work on. One idea per sticky. What are some things that you could do to help and solve this problem?
I think most of the tables are done, so if you want to have a bit of a conversation and merge things or get rid of duplicates, you can go ahead and do that.
Okay, so finish up the deduplication process. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. All the agile people will do this. Okay, so you probably have a whole bunch of ideas. We're going to classify some of these ideas. Anybody remember the three things that we could do when faced with how people process change differently? So if it's too hard, or if they think it's dumb, or if they just forget? Beat them with a stick? Did somebody say? We'll edit that out later. Make it easier. What else? Motivate them somehow. Okay. Make them talk. Okay. Okay. Or a little nudge, a little reminder. So what I want you to do with your ideas that you have for solving this problem is bucket them in those three categories. So do you have something that you think would make it easier for this change to happen? So you're going to have to consider this crazy thing called empathy and think about how the people that are affected by this change, what's different for them. So what might be easier for you from your perspective might not be easier for them. So think of who needs to do something differently with this change for make it easier. Same for sparking motivation and reminding people. It's about the people who are directly impacted by this change. So just take 5 minutes and just go through them quickly. Try to put them in those three buckets. Raise your hand if you're finished. Maybe the speaker's only working on this side. You guys done? More or less? More or less? You guys done more or less? Last one? Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right. So, now we're going to try something a little bit different, but before we do that, what was the process like? What was the process like putting into those three buckets? Did it change the conversations around change? Yes. Okay. How so? What was different? Give us an opportunity to think about the problem differently. Okay? Any other thoughts? Ah, okay. So there wasn't a lot of balance between the three. Which category had the most? Most was make it easy, okay. Anybody else have a similar thing where one bucket was fuller than the other? Okay. Which bucket was the fullest? Make it easy, spark motivation, forget about the people? Okay. Sue always forgets about the people. That's what coaches do. We'll edit that out too. Any other thoughts about that process? There are things that could fall in both. Yep. Okay. 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 So keep it a bit loose. All right. Any other thoughts? Okay. So we all collaborated and landed on something that we thought we could do moving forward? Okay. Say more about that. They weren't crazy about the remind category. Okay, coercive. Anybody else think the same thing? The remind was kind of coercive? Anybody have a different definition of what remind meant? Raising awareness. Okay. Like a reboot or starting over. Okay. Okay. So people need to hear it more than once. They need to be reminded. Yep. The remind category was exclusively about supporting failure. Okay, so mechanism to support the failure. How do we involve people more? Okay. Who else had there? Mindfulness about where you are in the process. Okay. Was there another hand on the side that I missed? Okay. So the thing that we're going to try that's a little bit different is let's roam the white space. So if you are the person who had the problem, stay at your table. At least one person with context needs to stay at the table. Did anybody just make a problem up that wasn't contextual just for the sake of practice? Or it's a real thing? Okay, so stay at the table if it's your problem, and then random people join another table. Join another table, have a little quick discussion about what the problem is, and some of the solutions, which buckets they're in, and then see if you can kind of push the boundary a little bit. So is there something that, you know, if I go over to this table and they have something that's in the make it easier bucket that they think is the easiest thing, do I have an idea about how I could make it easier? So if it's, you know, create an Outlook plugin that directs people to the tool first. So that would make whatever this change was easier. I don't have the context that they have, which means I could probably suggest something that is not even on their radar. Just like, what color shirt am I wearing? Or the focusing on the icon on your phone. Your brain gets focused on something else and you block out other things. So the process of having other people come to the table and say, oh, did you think about this? Could be one of the, well, duh, of course we could have done that. So let's try that. When you go visit another table, try it within these three categories. Do you have something that could make it easier for that person? Do you have something that's more inspiring? Or what are some more creative reminders that you could do? So I'll set this for 10 minutes because you're going to need to gather a little bit of context about the problem. I'll give you one more minute, so we'll wrap up in 1 minute. Ten more seconds. Before we start the debrief, that's even better than a countdown dingy thingy. Has anybody heard of or used the popcorn principle before? So I learned this from Jackie Lloyd-Smith, who I did my Lego Serious Play training from. And it's the popcorn principle is when you're doing any type of facilitation or exercise that's creative in nature, it's difficult to put a time box on that. So it's like you put the microwave popcorn in there and it's pop, 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 pop. So when the pop starts slowing down, that's time to move on. And then it's burned, yes. So it's an interesting little trick, and it's the same thing kind of happens with change, right? We've got our Gantt chart with our schedule of when it should be done, but it's not done when the end date says it's done. There's always kind of the little pops that are happening after the fact, so I thought I'd throw that in. So first, the people who had the problem. What were your thoughts about getting the outside perspective? Okay, so the people outside synthesize the idea better. Okay. Okay, so it created more ideas. So clarity around the existing ones that spawned more spirals of popcorn of new ideas and things. Okay. Yeah. So Dory needed the nudge. Okay, interesting. Cool.
I was going to say something similar. A lot of the ideas I got were really just validations that I'm going in the right direction. But there's also a cool new set of ideas now that I can add on to the direction I was going in. So it's both supportive and helps me find new things.
Okay, so there was some validation that the problems that were on the page meant, yes, I validated I'm thinking the right way, but then there were more ideas that were helping with that path. That it was a nudge for her to get out of her comfort zone. Sounded like, right? Did I get that right? Okay, cool. Okay, so it sounds like the first part was diverging on getting a whole bunch of ideas, and this was sort of making it converge into real, feasible, tangible things. Okay. Okay, so reminding people was the hard one again. Anybody have a similar challenge? The remind people bucket was harder? Okay, anything else to say about that? What was hard about it? Okay. Okay, a lot of effort and labor in reminding people, and it's harder to do for us. Ah. Okay, so who are we reminding? So it was a parking situation. So is it the organizers? Is it the city? Who's the customer? Okay, interesting. Was there another hand up here before I go to the back? Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, what would work as a reminder, and why did the initial change or thing that we tried didn't work, and how would reminding them make it better? Okay. People who were visiting another table, what was different for you? Felt like we needed to up our game a little bit. Okay, all right. I saw some nods. Yeah.
It was interesting to see new ideas that could apply back to the original problem we were dealing with, so kind of bringing some of those ideas back.
Oh, okay, so.
Different context, but it would actually flush out some areas.
Anybody have the same thing? You went to another table and there were some solutions that you thought, hey, I could bring that back to the problem I was working on. Was that right? Okay, cool. Anything else? All right, so this is a couple of things that are underneath this exercise. And we did the mingle part. This slide left blank on purpose. There's kind of two dimensions with those three buckets, if you will. So sparking motivation is all about motivation. And like I said earlier, we kind of default to that, right? We default to how do we motivate people? If I don't see somebody taking action, then it's immediately, humans are really good at externalizing the blame. That's just the way we are. It can't be me, it's something with that person. But if I'm not doing this change, it's because of some weird, crazy thing in the environment. So it's the circumstance that I am in is making me not want to do this change. But when it's other people, it's because they don't want to do it. They don't want to sing that Kelly Clarkson song. Jeff wasn't listening. That's okay. So one axis is motivation. So motivation is low and high. The other one is ability. So that really speaks to how hard or easy this thing is. And sometimes ability can mean a few different things. It can mean if I'm trying to learn TDD, for example, test-driven development, and I haven't done it before, it's just hard. So it's going to take some effort for me to learn that. And some things are pretty easy. If you're working with people that have, years and years of experience in a certain area, but they haven't heard of that idea before, then it's easy for them to implement. Ability could also mean just in my organization, it's hard. So anybody work in a large enterprise, 10,000 plus people, couple people. So there's things in the system that make it hard to get stuff done. There's processes and big enterprisey things that just make it hard to get things done. So it's not just about you as the person, it's also about the environment that you're operating in. So in this model, there's what is called an activation threshold. And if it's hard to do, but we're highly motivated to do it, top left, change is still not likely to happen. So motivating people more when it's just a thing that's really hard to do, likely not going to happen. But if it's low motivation, nobody cares, they think the change is dumb, and it's a hard thing to do, more likely, no, it's definitely not going to happen. And then if it's easy to do, but people don't really care or they think it's dumb, change is not going to happen. So every type of change is a trigger. And in this model, which was created by Professor B.J. Fogg, says that activation threshold is we have to look at both of those dimensions. And the way that we think about that, make it easy is about facilitating. So if motivation is high but it's hard to do, we have to make it easier. So that could be things like in one large organization that will remain not named, we couldn't get the sponsors of the change to show up to the sponsor meetings, the bi-weekly change meetings where we're talking about updates and things like this. So we had the idea of, it's just hard. Who's an executive in the room? Nobody? Okay, all right. So it's a busy life, right? Emails from 6 to midnight, everybody's bombarding you with stuff. Sometimes it's just hard to do all these extra things. So we thought we could distill the status report on a big piece of flip chart paper and tape it onto their doors. So how could we make it easier for them to get this information, which would make it really hard for a nationally distributed company of change people to do that change. So we decided not to do it because logistically it would just be harder. But the thought process, we immediately jumped to, well, sponsors don't care. How many times have you heard leaders don't support this change because they don't show up for these meetings, or I don't see any evidence that they're supporting it? Anybody? As long as your boss is not in the room? Yeah, it's a busy job. So don't assume that they don't care because they're busy. They got day jobs. They've got, I talked to one executive in a large global bank overseas that the day before I was there was a scandal in the news about how they had incorrectly reported on liquid assets, which affects their credit rating. They've got other stuff to worry about than whether or not a team's putting sticky notes on the wall. So they've got real hard problems to solve. It's not that they're not motivated, it's just hard. So what could we do to make it easier? Signal, reminding people, is Professor Fogg has something he calls tiny habits. Anybody know what that is? I know Andrew does, because Andrew introduced me to this. So try not to do a big change, but try to piggyback a change on top of an existing ritual. If you are trying to get off coffee in the morning, and who would be crazy enough to do that because coffee is awesome? you would put a sticky note in your cupboard. So if your ritual is to come down and open up the cupboard and get the coffee out and you're on autopilot, there's a big pink sticky there that says you want to stop doing this. So it's a signal, it's a reminder to your brain. So his tiny habits is, how do we do something small? You can't get your leadership team at the new change meetings, whatever it is. How can you hijack the last 10 minutes of their existing meeting instead? So don't try to add or displace, piggyback on something new. This is why big visible walls work. Because big visible walls, for people that are in an agile organization, it's a reminder that, first of all, a change is happening. So we see stuff going on, and then people see it and they start to ask questions about it. So those types of visual reminders can be very important. And then the last one, if it's easy to do, but people aren't motivated to do it, then we have to figure out how to motivate them. And I'm not a huge fan that you can motivate people. I don't believe in external motivation. I believe people will do the change when they feel they need to, or want to, or have to. You know, I've worked in some organizations where we're deploying software that affects 5,000 people nationally, and they have to do it no matter what, and it's a pain in the ass for them. But we can still try to figure out, is there a better way that we could introduce or sequence people through this change a little bit differently? But we have to figure out the what's in it for them, and I saw that written on a couple of stickies. I saw the acronym for what's in it for them, which is pretty cool. But it's always a different approach that we need to take. And this is one way, instead of planning the whole change up front and executing it and closing the project down, do this process on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. So with who works on an official change team, if you will? You're on an internal transformation team, or you're in the change management department. Okay, so most people, it's just kind of skunk works. You've been tasked with getting this thing to work. It's still a good process to do with a bunch of people who are doing this change at the side of their desk. You can come up with a bunch of different types of options, categorize them this way, and then figure out how to vote on the top 3. Or maybe there's one from each bucket you can try and see how you can move the change forward. Keep all the sticky notes on the wall. 2 weeks later, do a retrospect in front of all the things you thought were a good idea, what happened, and do this process again. Which it's harder because it's a lot harder on the thinking part of our brains. But bjfog.com has some really interesting ideas and models. He also has a behavior grid which talks about things like temporary change. So I'm going to try this for 2 weeks, but I'm not going to change my whole life. Or yes, I'm going to try and quit smoking, or I'm going to try to change this habit. So he's got some really cool ideas and techniques for behavior change, but it's coming from a place of trying to understand what's different for other people and creating a system around them that encourages the change versus what normally happens, which is we need to baseline our behavior change. I spoke at something here a few months ago, and our topic was around culture. So Carlos Oliveira and myself did a session around changing your culture. And we started off by asking, who knows how to do that? And of course, the organizational development consultant gets up. Yes, we create a baseline of the existing behaviors. We create a plan for how we're going to change those behaviors. In 3 months, we measure the change of that behavior. So I said, okay, well, how do you measure the change of behavior? I needed a cricket wave file here. There was just no response. So it sounds great in theory, but it's always, how do we change other people? Where it should be, well, if this change isn't sticking, maybe there's something I could do a little bit different, such as sing a Kelly Clarkson song. Here's an example of this in the wild. So you can draw out the model itself on the wall and use it as a way to visualize, top left of being facilitate, top right being signal, bottom right being things that you're doing to spark motivation. It's a quick and easy thing to do. The last point about this before we might have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before the break is this doesn't beat people over the head with change models, right? Has anybody been, hit over the head with a, ADKAR or this process or the Cotter model or you don't have the right urgency from your coaches or that's not the agile mindset or you're not being agile, you're doing agile? Saw a couple of nods. Normal people, I like to say, don't care about these models. They just want to know what's different for me. Why is it so hard? Why should I do it? I don't get it. this, I find, is one of the most helpful things to be able to help get change unstuck. So we probably have time for a couple of questions before break. Yes, Elizabeth is nodding, so if she's happy, I'm happy. Sure. The lovely Sue will be our mic runner if there's any questions.
Have one, because I paid for this.
Oh, you have a question?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I'm running.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
So how did you get them to agree to even do this exercise?
Yowza. Well, it was starting off with not this model drawn out on the wall, but it was similar to this exercise. So what do you think is really hard about doing this? What would make you care about it? Oh, the specific one where we were trying to figure out how to make it easier by bringing the big flip chart and taping it onto their walls. We showed 2 of them, I believe, and they liked the idea, but the change team actually was the ones that just logistically, it would have been too hard for us, spread across a national organization. Yeah, this wasn't the example from that we did, but that was the thought process, how to make it easier.
Quick question. This is all fantastic, but it seems that it's to be work on people in the same physical room.
Mm-hmm.
Can this be applied for remote teams where everybody's working from home?
If only we had a remote working expert in the house who might be able to answer that question.
This is Lisette.
So you're asking, how can we do this when people are also working from home? Ooh, I will answer that. My whole talk is about this. So I will totally answer that. But the answer is yes, you can totally do it. Absolutely, no problem. I hope to show you some great tools for it too.
Thanks, Lisette.
All right, please welcome back to the stage, Yef and E.
Just leave this slide up for a second.
Second, leave the slide up. I just want to point out, yes. Whoa!
Out the door there. There's no smoking as there's no fire allowed in this building. So if you are going to smoke, please just step outside. We have the doors. Coffee and snacks are still out there. We will see you guys back here at 1.